Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks for joining us. And yeah, I'm James Valdez, and I'm with the City of Portland in the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, which is tasked with overseeing the Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Fund. It's a mouthful there. We usually do shorten it to Portland Clean Energy Fund, or PSEP, so you will hear that throughout the presentation. And yeah, I use he, him pronouns. And thanks all, and you'll hear more from me in a little bit.
And my name is Corey Omi. I am, as Aaron said, the owner of and architect, project team supporter at EMA Architecture. I've also been the board president for Solar Oregon, a local nonprofit providing clean energy education for a clean energy future.
And hi everyone, my name is Anissa Pemberton and I am the Portland Clean Energy Fund Coalition Coordinator at the Coalition of Communities of Color. And we're going to be talking today about how the Portland Clean Energy Fund was passed on the ballot and more about the history of the Portland Clean Energy Fund. So if we could go into the next slides, that'd be great. So the Portland Clean Energy Fund was established by a successful ballot measure in 2018. It was passed by 65% of Portland voters. It is the first environmental measure led by and created by communities of color. And on the right of the slide, you'll see the amazing steering committee that I'm privileged to help organize. And folks on the committee include the Coalition of Communities of Color, the Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon, Verde, NAACP of Portland, Opal Environmental Justice, the Native American Youth and Family Center. And then we have our privileged white dominant organizations that support our work. And those folks include 350 PDX, Sierra Club of Oregon, Oregon PSR, Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility, forgive me going into acronyms. Then we have Portland Audubon and Columbia Riverkeeper. And we got together in 2015. We met for years to create the ballot measure. And members of frontline communities, which in the climate justice world refers to people who are on the front lines of the climate crisis, and in this case, primarily Black, Indigenous, and people of color organizations, really led the space. We were in the main public speaking roles, we developed the strategy, and we also really honed in on the idea and built the coalition. Predominantly white organizations, so folks like the 350 PDX, were in the space of really having capacity in support. So they helped organize petition drives and helped us campaign. And so we became a new political majority in the city of Portland, which is really exciting. And honestly, with the direction that more cities, I hope, are going to go in as we move forward through 2020. So our political majority included folks across a wide variety of groups. We had folks from housing, the B Corp community, of course. We also had a lot of folks from hundreds of nonprofits, and of course environmental organizations came along as well as labor groups. Actually, there was a large, substantial number of labor groups. Can we go to the next slide, please? So why does PSEF matter to you in the B Corp community? So I think there's a couple things that I was thinking about in preparation for today. So I was thinking about the importance of replication of a frontline-led climate justice coalition and the really variety of groups that came together to pass PSEF. You know, in that short little introduction, I tried to sum up years of organizing to you all. It was really across issue areas that people came together. So we saw everybody from small businesses to local advocacy groups to racial and economic justice groups come together to pass this. The other thing that was really interesting about the PSEF and that I hope gets replicated across the nation is listening and honoring the knowledge of communities of color. Sometimes in the environmental world, there's a false idea that communities of color don't have leadership capacity to add in this space or don't care about environmental and climate justice. And that's just not true. We really do care. And we really want to see a future that includes us and includes white folks, includes everybody. And the other thing is that I think it's really great that this was a community-led policy, that this was something where people were able to see themselves in PSEF, were able to see the future. The other thing that I think is really important is that ultimately we hope that there will be more investments in solutions like community-owned solar over time. And so I'm speaking for the coalition. The coalition hopes to see some more investments and innovative investments. So community-owned solar is when a group of people own solar panels together. And this is often a solution for those who live in multifamily housing buildings or renters, and therefore can't install solar onto their buildings. And I think this will also support in low barrier investments for low income folks. So people can actually invest their money in something, and they can earn money, and they can grow their wealth through this sort of solution. The other thing that's just sort of a baseline importance is, like, all of us care about reducing cost of energy and ultimately reducing energy output, ultimately reducing greenhouse gas output. And that's going to be good for everybody. So I think community-owned solar is a really interesting idea. It's been really interesting to see it happen in the local Portland area. One of the steering committee folks who couldn't be with us today, but they have some great community-owned solar projects and are really innovative on that level. Yeah, next slide. So this is just a like, hey, you can get in touch with me slide. This is my email, anissa@coalitioncommunitiescolor.org. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Again, this is the coalition's Twitter and Instagram, just to differentiate us. And then you can also sign up to receive email blasts from the Portland Clean Energy Fund Coalition. And then of course you can always, if you live in the Portland area or are interested in organizing, I highly encourage everybody to get involved with our core groups or to search out communities of color in your own communities and volunteer for them. I'm sure that there are many groups around the country that are doing innovative, creative work like the Portland Clean Energy Fund. And so with that, I'm going to pass it off to my friend and colleague, James.
Yeah, hi everybody. And yeah, thank you, Anissa, for the background. And, we are just super grateful to all the work by the activists and organizations and businesses that help support Portland Clean Energy Fund. And so I wanted to talk about where are we now? And, 2018 seems like it was a very long time ago in the context of everything we've been through, even over the past few months. But there's been a lot of work happening in the past year and a half or so since I joined the city of Portland and helping implement this program. And so it's just really important to kind of note the different milestones that we've been through, and that this is really kind of a community building process. Also, I wanted to just highlight one piece, which is really what is the Portland Community Energy, or the Portland Clean Energy Fund, and where does the money come from? Because it's an important element of the campaign and also the continuance of the fund. And so the fund comes from an assessment on the business license fees of large corporations, those that do over $1 billion of business nationally and over $500,000 of business within the city of Portland. So broadly, this is around the retail sales and services of large corporations in Portland. I'd say that, in this community, there's probably very few that are B Corps, but some of them may be. And if you do work for one of these corporations that is subject to the 1% clean energy surcharge, then you work for a very successful company. But the majority of small companies in Portland are not impacted and don't have to pay into this fund. There's also exemptions for necessary things like food, medicine, utilities, and the things that we need in our everyday lives to live. So there's an intentionality behind the fund for it not to be regressive. And then there's also intentionality for the benefits of the fund and the allocation to go towards priority communities, including low-income communities and communities of color. And so over the last year and a half or so, we've been doing a lot of work in getting this program really launched. A key element of that was getting the decision-making committee together. And so Anissa works for the coalition, But there's a separate 9-person committee of volunteers that actually help make the decisions about the funding and the allocation of that funding. And so those were appointed by City Council through a rigorous process at the end of last year. And so then we've been over this year really working on building the program and including different check-in points for public input. We've had thousands of people and hundreds of organizations provide input to how we launch the program. And so this includes things like providing comment on guiding principles, which I'll get into in a moment, as well as really a transparent process for looking at the scoring criteria and what the evaluation panel and the committee members will be reviewing and what they'll be weighing. And so very excited to announce that just about a month ago, we were able to announce the first round of funding that we have, which is for $8.6 million. And I'll get into some of what those funding areas are in a little bit. And right now we're just in an education and kind of training opportunity phase right now to get people ready to apply. The applications for the Portland Clean Energy Fund are due November 16th for this first round. And then we'll be going through an analysis and scoring and review process that will really take a couple months, and the holidays coming up. We anticipate that by the beginning of next year, around February, we'll be able to have a vote by the grant committee and then City Council to be able to distribute that funding. Then we'll go into the next round of funding for 2021, which will be significantly larger. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And so I just wanted to highlight briefly some of the guiding principles of how we're doing this work and how really the grant requests that come in are going to be viewed. And so those are centered around really addressing both climate action in multiple ways and with multiple benefits that address both social and racial equity. Kind of underneath that or in that vessel is also guiding principles to be justice driven and making sure that we're addressing both historic and current discrimination, and we're centering the voices and needs of disadvantaged and marginalized groups, particularly Black and Indigenous people, that we're community powered, that we're continually learning from and trusting the community experience for innovation and leadership, and that we're accountable. You know, these are public funds ultimately, and we need to make sure that we're transparent, that there's oversight, and that there's engagement processes that provide for public input and allow us to continue learning. So I'll get into a little bit of who is eligible to apply here in the next slide, because this is important for you as you think about your interaction as B Corps, because organizations that are eligible to apply are really nonprofit organizations, those that are federally tax exempt and that are registered as nonprofits with Oregon Secretary of State and that are not disqualified for being bad actors by the Department of Justice. However, there can be partnership between nonprofits and private businesses or other nonprofit organizations or government agencies. We understand that in building this clean energy economy, there's a role for the private sector to play in providing services and doing construction work, in hiring people to do this type of activity. And so there can be partnership, and we encourage you, especially within the B Corp world, to reach out to organizations that you already have relationships with that might be interested in climate work and that have a social and racial justice lens, and consider opportunities to work together. Also, for small nonprofit organizations that aren't yet as fully established, there is an opportunity to apply through fiscal sponsorship, and we have some guidance about that on our website. So I wanted to go into the next slide, which really talks about what funding areas there are and how much money we have available in this round versus what we'll have in future years. And so in this initial allocation of funding, we have $8.6 million available, and there's the ballot initiative that voters voted and passed has a kind of allocation thresholds or windows for different types of projects. And so the majority of that funding in this round, between $3.5 to $5 million, will be dedicated to clean energy projects. So this is things around generating renewable energy. So it could be solar power or community solar, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Or this could also be energy efficiency improvements or weatherization in the places where people live, work, worship, or learn. This can be in any type of building, but there is a priority in this funding round for projects that reduce the energy burden or that serve low-income residents or communities of color. And so there's a bit of a focus on residential energy benefits in this funding round, but all funding types are eligible to apply. There's also a funding allocation for green infrastructure and sustainable agriculture. And this is recognizing that there's carbon benefit to planting trees, to doing farming and soil practices that retain carbon in the soil, to reducing the food miles traveled in providing food to people in Portland. And things like bioswales and green roofs, that there's a carbon sequestration value to the things that are growing in and around our cities. So there's about $840,000 to $1.3 million dedicated to that. Then there's also a recognition that we need to diversify the workforce, and we need to create new opportunities for people of color, people with disabilities, women, and people who've had historical barriers to employment to get into this new clean energy economy. And so there's between $1.7 to $2.1 million allocated to getting apprenticeship programs, workforce training, and job placement programs up and running. And so these are the kind of funding areas that we have, but there's also different types of grants. We have $1.5 million dedicated to what we're calling planning grants, recognizing that there's organizations that still need time to get their project ideas together, to build those partnerships, either with organizations like yourself as B Corps or with other organizations, and to really build their project proposal. And these are grants that can be for up to $100,000 per grant and are anticipated to happen within a 1-year period. Then we have kind of this whole bucket, about $7.1 million dedicated to actual project grants. These are about building stuff and doing things. And so those are broken into small grants, which are under $200,000, or large grants, which can be between $200,000 and $1 million per grant application. And so we expect to see a range of creative grant applications, and really a range of different approaches and diversity of both project partnerships and types of projects. And so we're really excited for this first round. However, we also will be releasing another round in kind of mid-2021, which will be significantly larger. That will be between $40 to $60 million. And ongoing year after that, we'll also have between $40 to $60 million. And so these general funding areas will probably change a little bit in terms of the exact numbers and percentages. But this overall framework is what we anticipate moving forward with. And so there's new opportunities both to plan projects now through those planning grants, but also to build things in this funding round, and even more into next year. And so, when we think about things like community solar, I also just want to highlight that there's a particular kind of regulatory boundary around community solar, and an opportunity through something called the Oregon Community Solar Program, which is a opportunity for multiple people and customers of a utility to come together and be subscribers or owners in a single system, and then receive bill credits on their bill. So I'm not endorsing any particular model, and we have to be very careful as program staff, but I did want people to know, and we can talk a little bit more about how particular programs are opening up in addition to Portland Clean Energy Fund that help address energy burden and help have goals for serving low-income people as well. So what we're doing in the Portland Clean Energy Fund is definitely not in the vacuum. We're trying to plug into and work with existing programs, either things like Energy Trust of Oregon and programs that have been around for a while, or new things like the Oregon Community Solar Program. And so I'll go ahead, and I have just one more slide, which is some contact information of where to find out more. And because right now in the coming weeks, we have some webinars and grant writing trainings that are available. These are really targeted to nonprofits, but anybody can attend. So if you're interested, feel free to. These are also available via recording on our website. And then if you have questions about Portland Clean Energy Fund, we have a kind of rolling Q&A section on our website. And then also there's our contact information to kind of ask questions about the program. So I'll go ahead and pass it on to Corey, and then we can also, I think, do some Q&A later. So thank you.
Great, thank you, James. And thank you all for inviting me to be part of this panel. we found at EMA Architecture, which is a small B Corp architecture firm here in Portland. We've been around for over 40 years. And as you can see, we're a client-driven and planet-focused architecture design firm. We found really the work that we do as architects, being able to bring renewable energy to a larger community of people than just those that can afford or have investment tax credit liability, as I'll talk about in a little bit. We found really it's providing solar systems for nonprofits. So it's kind of maybe the precursor to the community solar approach. And we hope to continue to work with our nonprofit partners to have solar on buildings and our business partners that can have solar on buildings, which create a community benefit so that we can remove the ownership requirement of owning a home or a roof or property to put solar on, or to have renewable energy as part of their energy mix, and to be able to work through community solar programs, which, like James just mentioned, there are solar programs that are starting to get to where people who don't have ownership of home are able to participate in community collective ownership. As a representative of Solar Oregon, I've been on the board of Solar Oregon, which is a local nonprofit and educating around clean energy. I've been on the board off and on for the last 8-9 years. I'm current board president, and I can say that the community solar approach and the concept is really great. We'll see where it goes. It is now open now for subscription to community solar projects, and I see in the future community solar and what community solar can really become will be what community solar we hoped would be right now, but isn't quite there. Would be that it's really solar for everyone and renewable energy that's accessible to everyone, no matter their status, their financial ability, their whether they're a homeowner or a renter. If you think about the barriers to clean energy, the very first one is ownership, which many people don't own a home. And then a lot of the work that's been done around solar and advancing solar as what used to be alternative energy is now clean energy, and it is a competitive and good way of receiving energy, of power. It has not empowered the people that most need clean energy. It's empowered those who have the federal tax liability, can participate in investment tax credits, like myself. But I think as a white male in a privileged position, it's how do we transfer that momentum of having clean energy to the people who most need and would most benefit from empowerment through clean energy. And I think that community solar can become that and will. The Portland Clean Energy Fund is obviously an amazing mechanism for promoting energy and efficiency. And I'm excited to participate in that. And Solar Oregon's role and approach is to work with nonprofits as the education nonprofit and supporter of their proposals. And we're working with the African American Alliance of Home Ownership, and reaching out to a broader audience than what we have typically in the past been able to reach. And that's an exciting part of what we're doing now as Solar Oregon. So thank you for including me and involving me in this presentation. I feel like there's a long way to go, and we have a lot of opportunity. The future is bright.
Thank you all. And there's so much to talk about. And some of the questions I had as I knew was going to happen were also alluded to and answered in what you guys discussed. Something I want to focus on that kind of ties a lot of it together too is that workforce development that had been brought up in a couple of you had brought up, and not only in the expansion of the awareness of and the accessibility to these initiatives, or to the access to clean energy, to regenerative farming, but and also that these industries are job creators, and that the more that they're adopted, the more jobs are available to that. Anissa, can you actually speak to that from your experience, and then we can go back to James and Corey?
Sure, yeah, and I'm happy to have input from James as well, and Corey. So one of the main components that is exciting about PSEF is that there will be workforce development investments. And so the goal of that is to invest in different small businesses through nonprofits, of course, through contracting with nonprofits, and to build up their workforce, as well as train people, have apprenticeship programs, and just create opportunities for workers of color and low-income workers to access traditionally white middle class opportunities. One of the things that I've noticed, as I'm relatively new to this topic, and so as I've sort of gotten more used to it and understood the context more, one of the things that's really important for everyone to understand is just that workforce opportunities, economic opportunities are really tied to racial justice. I mean, when we look at the historic systems that have been set up, people of color have been left out of the economy in many ways. And this is just one of the ways that we've been left out of the economy. And so I think it's exciting to think about what's possible. I mean, one of the hard things about starting a new program is you're kind of waiting to see like what will happen, what will we learn? And that's also very exciting. And yeah, James, do you have more to add on that?
Yeah, thanks, Anissa. And yeah, the workforce development piece is a huge component of where we think that the Portland Clean Energy Fund can be transformative and address past systemic barriers. But I also want people to take a kind of expansive view of what we mean by workforce development, because I think oftentimes when we think about clean energy jobs or green economy, there's almost too much of a focus on, rooftop solar installation or construction related elements. But there's also a lot of other roles in the new economy around clean energy, around regenerative agriculture, that is more kind of around design. It's sales and marketing. There's all sorts of kind of elements of community outreach that will be required as well in these programs for them to be effective and really meet their goals. And so, while there will be definitely a focus on training people to do some construction related activities and apprenticeships in those roles, there's also huge opportunity for other types of jobs. And again, addressing really what have been some systemic barriers for people of color and also for women in certain trades, and for people who've faced barriers to employment due to, for instance, prior incarceration or issues with the criminal justice system. And so the intent is for Portland Clean Energy Fund to be able to address those barriers and to do so creatively to create new wealth building opportunities for people who haven't had that before.
Yeah, thank you. Corey, you want to go ahead?
I was only going to say very well stated. I mean, that I don't have anything to add to that. That's yeah, thank you.
It's exciting to and I really use that word like genuinely. It's exciting to know that this is where we are today. It's actually live, and to think about if we have this panel on again a year from now, how much this conversation may actually change, and especially 2 years from now, because we can actually show some more proof of concept and data to show not only how the access to all this has increased, but then how, like you were saying, within the workforce, how large that umbrella becomes and how much more visible every element of it becomes. Just because it is launched, because it is activated, and because more and more organizations and people are taking part in it.
Yeah.
I knew this was going to happen too, because we don't have so much more time, and I know people are going to have questions. I have a few more questions, but I before we lead into Q&A, I think it's important to ask, when should B Corps, a lot of people who are participating in this session in these 2 days, and the people involved in B Corps, be engaging with nonprofits with regards to the Portland Clean Energy Fund, with regards to community solar projects, and how, so more very specifically, how can B Corps become a part of it? I know that, I think there's a way for B Local PDX as a nonprofit to be a resource here for B Corps and for the nonprofit beneficiaries, in a way, so to speak, of the B Corp for-profit companies. Anyone want to jump in with that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I have to be a little bit cautious about providing specific guidance. So that's my kind of, public disclaimer. But really, within the values and guiding principles of Portland Clean Energy Fund, I would urge B Corps to look at those and really pursue engagement with nonprofits in a way that is building long-term and genuine relationships. And so, I think there's some, I'd say, fear or concern among elements of the nonprofit community that there'll be a flood of pitches or business opportunities that are made to them without that kind of deeper engagement. And so at the same time, I know that, because B Corps, or my understanding, that there are some philanthropic and social goals that are already aligned, there may be a lot of pre-existing relationships that you as B Corp organizations and companies have with nonprofits that do align with the climate and justice goals of PSEF. And so if those already exist, now is a good time to start having those conversations of how you might be able to build a project together that fits within your own values and also those of Portland Clean Energy Fund. But also, this is a good opportunity for planning grants to help build those partnerships and those relationships better if they don't exist already for future funding rounds. So there's kind of a variety of answers to that based on where the relationship building already is. I guess that's probably the best I can give you. Anissa, you might have a coalition perspective too.
Yeah, from my perspective, my goal as the coalition coordinator is to serve as a conduit between the different communities, the BPS staff and communities, and a lot of other, just as a conduit of information, of connections, of building relationships. So if you wish to get in touch with somebody, I may know them, I may not, but if I do, I'm happy to connect you to them. But I kind of double down on what James said, approach this, if you are new to these nonprofits, approach it as you would any other relationship that you're building. Take your time and really get to know where that nonprofit's at. And I would advise coming in without an agenda, without a particular goal, because it may not come to be anything related to PSEF. It may be related to other work that they're doing. And so, just come in and be open-minded to building a relationship authentically.
Yeah, nice. And on the community solar aspect of that too, I've noticed that there is quite an interest level among nonprofits and for-profits and B Corps. And the more we learn about it, the more we see that there are multiple benefits, even for companies, to be the hosts or the hosts for community solar projects, and those benefits can actually drip down into the almost like an employee benefit. I mean, the more I've learned about community solar, there is, if a company decides that they would like to be proactive and be the host of such a project, that the renewable energy credits can actually be given to employees of those organizations, whether they be nonprofits or for-profits. And it's just another way of just expanding that web of those benefits. Because as you said, Corey, you alluded to that there's one of the obstacles here, which could make renewable energy and access to even like solar less equitable is that not everybody's a homeowner. And in a growing city like Portland, especially when we have now the infill project, and there's going to be more people, more and more renters, and we've seen the growth throughout our city of apartments, there's less opportunity there to actually get into home-owned solar and other renewable energy projects. And now through your work, there may be opportunities. By the way, I know we're switching over to Karen in a second. Here's a slide for information to get in contact with each of us in our programs. And Karen, take it away.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I just wanted to offer, if anyone is interested in getting in touch with B-Local PDX, the nonprofit, let me know. I'm on the board. We're all volunteer at this point, but you know, we have some great folks on our board. So if you're interested in exploring coalitions or partnerships with B Corps, info@blocalpdx, I'll drop that in as well. And it is time to go back to the main webinar. So I will drop the link in here so it's easy for y'all. And thank you all to our everyone who's attending and our panelists as well. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.